I guess that's the big contradiction of how the pill or contraception is sold. It's sold as the ultimate liberator of women. Where actually, in reality, it's the opposite. The Catholic Church states that the use of contraception is intrinsically evil and that it's a grave sin. I'm Lisa O'Hare. Today, we're going to talk about 5 reasons why contraception is wrong. Patrick, you're very welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Lisa.
So let's get stuck straight in there, Patrick. Contraception is considered intrinsically evil and a grave sin. Can you tell us the reasons why?
Yes, Lisa. Well, there are at least 5 significant reasons why the church teaches us that contraception is wrong. Number 1, it is a revolt. Contraception is a revolt against God. Number 2, contraception separates spouses. Number 3, contraception is a lie. Number 4, contraception destroys love. And number 5, contraception causes a loss of respect for women.
Wow, Patrick, there are 5 very strong, very serious reasons. So in today's show, we're gonna unpack those one by one. The first one that you stated was that contraception is a revolt against God. Can you elaborate on that a little?
Yes, Pope Pius XI, back in 1930, when he was responding to the Lambeth Conference at the time, basically stated in his encyclical Caste Connubii, he stated that those who are involved in contraception are involved in what he termed a grave sin. And when you look at what the Catholic Church teaches, well, what is the definition of sin? John Paul, the Catechism of the Catholic Church tells us that sin is disobedience, a revolt against God through the will to become like God's, knowing and determining good and evil. In other words, acting against the will of God and becoming like God himself. And then John Paul II taught us that those who use contraception claim a power which belongs solely to God, the power to decide, and what he says in the final analysis, the coming into existence of a human person, whether or not a human being should come into the earth and onto the earth. And that's a position of profound arrogance. Even though couples even realize it, they've moved on to ground of profound arrogance, of taking up the place of God to decide whether a new life should live or die. And that revolt, that disobedience to God's laws and his gospel, the church teaches, is indeed a revolt against God.
I mean, and if you think about it, and you mentioned it in your book, Who is at the Center of Your Marriage, that, I mean, this reminds us of the very first sin, the fall of man in the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve took on to be like God, and they were tempted. And I mean, at the root of all of that is a lie that we can become like God, a lie that Adam and Eve believed, and that has led us to, such heartbreak and such a legacy of the brokenness between mankind and God himself. So number 2, Patrick.
Yes, number 2, contraception separates. Contraception separates husband from wife. And in Humanae Vitae, the church teaches us that when a couple use contraception, they divide what's called the unitive dimension of their intimate marital act and the procreative. They separate union from procreation. The effect that has on marriages can perhaps be, it's well illustrated by a quote from Monsignor Cormac Burke, who a few years ago wrote a book called Covenanted Happiness, and he articulated it very well. He said, true conjugal love unites, contraception separates, and the separation works right down the line. He said, it's not only separates sex from procreation, it also separates sex from love. It separates pleasure from meaning and body from mind. Ultimately, he said, and surely, it separates wife from husband and husband from wife. Lisa, do you have a few stories to share of the effect that contraception has had on some married couples' lives that illustrate what this quotation says?
Yes, I mean, it was part of one of the most striking aspects of your book were the testimonies from the couples that contributed to the book. I was really amazed at how really honest that they were. And I mean, these are very intimate issues, and that idea of separation within a marriage are difficult to share. They're difficult even to come to terms with yourself. So Tom, he's quoted as saying, our sexual relationship changed from an act of marital union to a lust-filled activity. I no longer saw my wife as a person. I lost respect for her. Mary was left not feeling good. I wanted a good sex life and no hassle. Marie is quoted as saying, things had definitely changed. There was a widening rift, a breakdown in communication. We were developing different interests. The intimate part of our marriage seemed to be dying. We didn't feel important to one another anymore. Mary said that during this time, I felt really low, really cheap. There was no communication, no hugging. It was all about physical gratification. It wasn't love. It was horrible. My self-confidence plummeted. And Jared said, I'd grown bored with all this intercourse. It's available at every night meant it lost its specialness. There was a serious temptation to think about other women during our intimate moments, a sense of looking for fulfillment elsewhere. They're very striking testimonies, Patrick, to what you're saying about separation within marriage.
It's devastating, Lisa, and most people don't realize that if they're in a marriage that they're struggling and they think to themselves, oh, this is a situation where, gee, we couldn't have another child, and they start using contraception, they don't realize that they are actually importing into their marriage one of the most potent disintegrators of marital harmony into an already strained situation. And that very often has devastating effects.
And as we explained in the first show, we all enter marriage wanting to be united, want to be together, whereas contraception provides the very opposite. It separates us, it separates sex from love, pleasure from meaning, body from mind. And as you said, that's devastating. So Patrick,
yes.
Continuing on, contraception is a lie.
Yes, contraception is a lie. John Paul II said so in his encyclical Familiaris Consortio, and indeed Pope Paul VI termed its use intrinsically dishonest. Now, who wants to have a lie at the center of their marriage? Who wants to be communicating in an intrinsically dishonest way at the center of their marriage? And how is it a lie? Well, really, the intimate marital act between husband and wife, when a husband and wife are coming together in that act of union, their bodies are saying, I give myself wholly and completely to you. I hold nothing back. I am all yours. You are all mine. I accept you. I receive you. I give of myself. That's what their bodies are saying. But if a couple uses contraception, they hold back that most profoundly significant aspect of their lives, their fertility. And whilst their bodies are going through the outward motions of I'm giving myself to you, really they're not telling the truth to each other. They're withholding a profoundly important part of the very essence of their very being. And so there's where the lie comes in. They're going through the motions, but that's not the truth of what is being said.
And just when you were saying that, Patrick, you know, what came to me was that we say those vows in the church. We say, I give myself wholly to you. And that truth that we've stated before God and before our family and friends is true right throughout marriage. It's not a one-time statement that sort of blandly covers our whole marriage. And the church teaches that every single act, every single sexual act between a husband and wife must have that truth. It's not enough to pick and choose and to lie sometimes and to be truthful at others. Isn't that correct? That's one of the things that people don't realize, that they say maybe on the whole we're open to life, but at certain points, you know, we've used contraception. I think that's an important point that needs to be made.
Well, yes, this whole idea of a lie, the whole fall of man began with the lie of the serpent back in the garden in Genesis. And the lie then throws human relationships out of sync with each other but even more importantly, it throws those relationships out of sync with God. And if we're seeking true happiness in this world as well as the next, the call of God and the commandments are to remain faithful to the commandments, to remain faithful to the teachings of the church. And as we remain faithful and obedient to God, the harmony, the happiness, the grace, the peace flows. And that's the testimony of thousands over the world who have given up contraception in their marriages and returned back to God's laws and the use of natural family planning where necessary in grave circumstances. And we can come back to that again in a future show.
Okay, Patrick. So moving on, contraception destroys love. That was your point 4 of your list of 5.
Yes, well, contraception destroys love. Mother Teresa told us, and I quote, she said, "We cannot solve all the problems of the world, but never let us bring in the worst problem of all, and that is to destroy love. And this happens when we tell people to practice contraception."
And today, while we're recording this, it is the Feast of the Sacred Heart, you know, and God is love. We heard that in today's gospel. And he gives us through his son the ultimate example of love, which is giving yourself completely, self-sacrificing. I mean, we think of Mother Teresa as the ideal, you know, the modern day saint who gave her whole life in the service of others. So to hear her saying that, you know, should make us take notice when she's describing contraception as destroying love. And Mother Teresa also said that contraception turns the attention to self and so destroys the gifts of love in him or her. It destroys the gifts of love. Patrick, you have another quote where it actually describes what love is, or whether the act is actually truly love.
Yes, Pope John Paul II. By the way, people sometimes wonder, well, how can these popes be telling us married people what we should be doing, and where are they getting all this information? So they're not married, and how would they know? But actually, and this is I digress for a moment. John Paul II grew up in Poland, and he went off on camping trips with married couples, and he evidently questioned them deeply about all the different facets of their marriage and their married love. And he wrote his book, Love and Responsibility. And it's a wonderful, insightful book on the true nature of marriage. And that gave him the basis then for him doing this whole theology of the body and all the commentary that he made about marriage and sexuality in his later years. But so in his encyclical, or it was actually an apostolic letter, Familiaris Consortio, John Paul II wrote that contraception, the contraceptive act, is what he says, it ceases to be an act of love. It ceases to be an act of love. And so, and as you just said there, all of a sudden, self is brought into the equation rather than a total self-giving, and rather than an acting for the better of the other, selfishness takes its place, and selfishness really is the enemy of love. So that's why he says it ceases to be an act of love.
And you know that we as a community, or in general in the world, we have a complete distortion of what love is. Love has become selfish. It's about me. What can I get? What pleasure can I get? We seem to have lost sight of the fact that love is to will the good of another, to put someone else's happiness before our own. So what you're saying is that when you have contraception in marriage, then you're ceasing to think of the other. You're ceasing to think of their good and of giving yourself fully to them. What would you say, Patrick, to someone, again, I'm digressing now, to someone who thinks that they're using contraception out of love for the person, a husband who thinks that his wife's life might be in danger, so he's trying to use contraception, you know, out of love for her?
Yes, and I've known some couples who have used contraception for that genuine reason, and sadly, their marriages broke up. There was one person that I know who had one lady had a very difficult birth, the first birth of their child, and the husband who was looking on saw the difficulties that she went through, and he said, he vowed, there's no way she's going to go through that again. And they started to use a form of contraception, and unfortunately, a few years later, that marriage unhappily broke up. because people they can be deceived that they think they're doing what's the loving thing, but the enemy is very shrewd and subtle and can drop things into our lives and help make us think that we're doing good, whereas even unrealizingly we can be acting against God's laws. Because love really is about, Jesus said, greater love is no one he who lays down his life for his friend. And he manifested that on the cross, that he gave his very life blood for the love of us. And that's what love is, true self-giving. So couples who find themselves in that very difficult situation, and they have grave reasons to not to conceive another child, and this is a subject we will deal with in a later show in a week or two, they have options of looking at natural family planning, which is justifiable in very serious reasons, and making sure that they don't conceive, at least for a period of time, until they feel that any time of danger, whether it be health or any other reasons, it has passed. So, and then the final thing then, Lisa, that I wanted to say, the fifth point about contraception, is that contraception causes a loss of respect for women. Pope Paul VI wrote in his encyclical Humani Vitae, and I quote, he said, "It is also to be feared that the man, growing used to the employment of anti-conceptive practices, finally may lose respect for the woman, and no longer caring for her physical and psychological equilibrium, may come to the point of considering her as a mere instrument of selfish enjoyment, and no longer as his respected and beloved companion." And sadly, that has been the case in thousands, even millions of couples around the world, that the woman ends up being abused and abused for selfish ends, and inherently knows that she's not being truly loved.
Well, I guess that's the big contradiction of how the pill or contraception is sold. It's sold as the ultimate liberator of women. Where actually, in reality, it's the opposite. Women can become slaves to either their own passions or to a man's passions, and it allows a man freedom to have, in effect, sex without consequences. And so it's women who suffer most through the use of contraception, which is not what you'll be told by those who are promoting contraception itself. So Patrick, those are our five main reasons. And I say the main reasons, we have so many, we just wanted to pick out five for our viewers today. What would you say to, in conclusion, to people who have never heard this before, who maybe are using contraception in their marriage and go, okay, what am I supposed to do with this information now?
Well, we're all in the same boat. We all do wrong. And Jesus, even when the lady was caught in adultery in the Gospels, he said to her, "Neither do I condemn you, but go and sin no more." And that's the same for every one of us. We all do wrong every day. And what somebody finds easy not to do, the next person would struggle. So we all have our weak points. And Jesus's words to every one of us is that if we sin, he says, "Neither do I condemn you, go and sin no more." And the beauty of the Catholic Church is we have that gift of confession available to us, where we all need to go and repent of our sin. But repentance isn't a negative thing. It's a liberation thing. It's an act of joy. It brings great joy when it's viewed properly. And we can go to confession and receive the gift of Christ's merciful love and be separated. And if someone has been listening to our broadcast today and never heard some of these things, and very often these things are not being very freely spoken about, and has a revelation, gee, I hadn't thought of these things. There's more to this than I hadn't realized. And what these folks have said today, I've heard them for the first time. The Lord is waiting to take you back, to take us all back into his arms, and to enter into a place of greater peace with ourselves and peace in our relationship with the people around us. And there is a better way than in contraception, even in very difficult circumstances. And we'll address that in the next week or two.
And I think, just to conclude also, that we talked about truth. And sometimes the truth is painful. This may be painful for you to hear. I'm speaking directly to our listeners. This may be painful to hear, but the truth does set us free. And that's not a, sort of a cliche or an easy saying. If we have a lie in our marriage at any point, no matter if it's a trivial one, it needs to be uprooted. It needs to be renounced, and truth needs to given the light to shine through, because, a lie is poison, and we've been given the grace of confession to actually root out that poison and to turn back to God. So, I mean, we're hoping that this is a positive broadcast, that this is to bring truth and life to
That's
people.
right.
And, the walk of the Catholics, the walk of Christians is not easy. These teachings that Christ gave us, we're not under any illusions that these are easy teachings, because the easy option is the pill or any kind of contraception. We don't have to think. We don't have to make hard choices. We can just, we can just get on with life without having to really deeply think. So, we have to pick up our cross, but with the cross brings us life. So, Patrick, thank you very much. Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
everyone, for listening today. As I said, those were our 5 reasons why contraception is wrong. We're going to continue this conversation on contraception. We've many other issues to look at, Patrick, to look forward to, with regard to, like you said, when people have serious reasons for wanting to postpone a pregnancy, the whole idea of NFP, the whole idea of how they can act within church teaching and through the guidance of the church. Any of the other topics, Patrick, that we have to look forward to?
Yes, Lisa, we're hoping to address questions such as, can a person contracepting receive the Eucharist on a Sunday? The questions such as, what do I do if my priest tells me that contraception is okay? The question of, well, just who does the church think it is telling us all these things that what we can and can't do? Natural family planning, can we use it? Does it really work? Is it effective? When can you use it and when can you not use it? For example, is natural family planning just another form of Catholic contraception? And then finally, how many babies should you have? How many babies is a married couple expected to have in the Catholic, in God's eyes and in the eyes of the Catholic Church teaching? Those and a whole string of other very interesting subjects we're going to address. And indeed, if anybody wants to send in their ideas of what they would like us to address, send me an email even at patrick@humanlife.ie, and we'll have a look at it, and we might just be able to address your question.
Okay, thank you so much. Please remember that we at Human Life International Ireland are working and praying for an Ireland where God is first, life is sacred, and the family is cherished. Until next time, God bless.
God bless.